Hello, and welcome to the Trust and Influence in B2B podcast. I'm your host, Joel Harrison. Thought leaders, influencers, advocates. We use these terms constantly in B2B marketing, but most of us don't actually know what the differences are. And I don't mean that to sound patronizing, that's just the reality. The terminology has become confused. The lines between these roles become blurred, and as a result, most brands are using the wrong people in the wrong way, or ignoring some of the most powerful trust personas altogether. And that's all adding to the trust problem that's endemic in B2B. I spent the last few months analysing data from over 1,000 B2B marketing awards entries to understand how brands are actually deploying these individuals. And I've used that research to develop a new framework called the B2B Matrix of Influence, which maps 5 distinct personas and how they should work together or how brands should use them. To mark the launch of this framework, I ran a live stream with my guest Katy, founder and CEO of Immediate Future, the social media agency she's been running since 2004. Katie's one of the most experienced people in B2B when it comes to influencer strategy, and she's been my guest on this podcast before. What you're about to hear is that conversation adapted for the podcast, and you can download the full framework by the link from the show notes. So let's get into it. Hi, Katy.
Hi.
So welcome, everybody. We're going to talk today about a new framework which I've been working on over the last year, and we're going to preview that and obviously ask people to ask questions as well. So we'd welcome your thoughts and contribution on that. By way of a little background, I'm very pleased to see is increasingly on everyone's radar, right? And we're seeing more and more people talking about trust, and it's always been foundation in B2B marketing and sales. In terms of the kind of the rise of AI, intermediation of content, disintermediation of kind of media providers, and also content overload has made trust much harder to attain and retain. And in that context, all leaders, influencers, and advocates have become powerful exponents of trust. And these individuals can lend a lot of credibility and allow cut through in ways that brand messaging alone can't do it. But there's a problem associated with that, which is that terminology around these roles are increasingly confused. Sometimes that's innocent. People haven't got an idea of actually what these terms actually mean. Sometimes it's deliberate. Agencies, platforms, and practitioners blurring the lines because it suits them, because they don't necessarily want to be kind of clear and precise about precisely what's going on. So I've spent the last few months analysing data from over 1,000 B2B marketing awards campaigns via the entries to the B2B marketing awards, and looking at how brands are actually deploying this and what it actually looks like in reality. The picture's really revealing, and I argue that it's really actually quite concerning as well. It suggests we're over-relying on some personas and completely ignoring others. I think, generally speaking, there's an opportunity to do much more with these particular personas. So today, Katy and I are going to kind of try and bring some clarity to this, and we're going to explore why the confusion exists and what data tells us. I'm going to introduce a framework, which I discussed earlier on, to kind of try and provide some clarity around this and help marketers how to understand how these individuals are and how to make best use of them. So that's what we're going to do today. So the next thing is to hand over to Katy to introduce Katy. Probably Katy, you're very well known in B2B marketing circles, but tell us about you, from those that are uninitiated, what it is that you do and who you work with and all those kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here. This is a hot topic for me because I run an agency, social media agency called Immediate Future. And we've been doing social media since 2004. Back when influencer relations, or whatever you want to call it these days, was actually blogger relations. I had worked with all sorts of companies to help them bring on board work alongside very reputable bloggers, from working with companies like, Sony, Diageo, Fujitsu, IBM. We even did a stint with Thomson Reuters and Clarivate. But I think one of the really interesting, all the way through my marketing career, I've really been interested in the kind of why people buy. What is that decision-making process to purchase, rather than what we want them to do, if you see what I mean. That don't get me wrong, that is a starting point, but if you're not looking at why your customers want to buy or how they're buying, you're missing it. And I think right now we've come to this inflection point, which is really interesting, which is I'm getting, like you, slightly obsessed with, which is why you and I keep having conversations about this, and that is trust and influence, because buyers are shortlisting in feeds, communities, and private chats long before the sales teams even get a look in. So the dominance and predominance of marketing is now really important. There is no other way of putting this. If you want growth, you need to be involved in marketing with credibility.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's that trust and that credibility that comes from those trusted individuals wherever they play within that spectrum, which we're going to talk about later on, is absolutely vital. It's become more and more apparent to me as I've been speaking to people like you and recording these episodes of the podcast for the past year. So I'd say at the beginning that we've got these kind of three kind of primary personas. Talk about thought leaders, or thought leadership is an area that's talked about a lot, influencers and advocates. Do you think marketers actually know what these terms mean? Because the impression I get is that often they don't. And I don't mean that to sound patronizing, but that's just the impression I'm getting from a lot of these conversations I've had.
Yeah, I don't think they do either. And I think it's partly because it's got blended. It's partly because your average marketeer in B2B is run off their feet and they haven't got time to go, what am I doing in this? So they kind of, influencer becomes this blanket term, which is fine. But what ends up happening as a consequence is that many teams end up treating influence like a media plan, all about reach and frequency and versus the creator fee, or instead of how this is impacting the buyer journey and how are we making sure we're reducing, risk or regret of the buyer. Instead of going down that path, we're now going, this is all about how much awareness, how many clicks we get. And it's wholly understandable, but the consequence of that is that we are living in a world where a lack of definition is not helping us.
I mean, that's really interesting, because that I hadn't considered that aspect of it. That seems like the commercialization of. I mean, someone like a commercial influencer, which we'll talk about later on, that makes a lot of sense for them to be given, because there's a paid budget associated with that. So I can see the logic in doing that. But you're saying that's a dangerous mindset to get into, because you're misunderstanding those other personas within that spectrum, and they don't operate on that levels. But I suspect you're also saying that even with those paid influencers, that's not an ideal scenario.
Yeah, and I'm not saying paid influence is not a good idea, or paid thought leadership. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the thing is, it's the attitude of the marketing teams that if they're paying for it, then it has to reach a KPI such as reach or engagement or something like this. And they become more instructional. Actually, what you really need is much more free flowing. So yes, you can have paid influencers, you can have advocates, you can have whatever, we'll look at the matrix and we could talk about that mix. However, purpose of working with people who will create content around your company is not for them to just be a voice piece. The whole point is that they are there to add credibility, to influence decision making, to have a point of view, or whatever it is that angle might be that you're looking for, not for you to dictate a brief.
Okay. And just building on that, then, from in terms of, like, we talked about this being a trust problem. I mean, and my contention is that this is a situation that was probably always there, but it's got worse. Do you agree with that? And tell me why you think it might have got worse in the last couple of years.
I think there's two or three things. First of all, buying is way more self-directed than it's ever been. In other words, our buyers are doing it by themselves. And I think social has not helped this side of it, in the sense that we are more suspicious. We look at a claim by a brand and, it says it's the fastest or the most secure. And we go, yeah, really? Is it? Because that is our default setting. I mean, let's face it, the world is on fire. I'm not really surprised that's our default setting. So people are doing their homework in private. They're think of it like they're triangulating across voices, brand claims, and kind of what else is being, reviews and what else is being said. So trust is not a nice to have. It's kind of the filter that decides whether or not you make the shortlist. And I'm going to add this little bit about AI, which is, of course, the search engines are also more likely to pick up on brands that have credibility and trust, and so have other voices talking about them in a positive light. They're more likely to pick on that when somebody goes to AI and says, shortlist me a CRM, 10 CRM companies I should look at for this. And you are more likely to end up in the search engines in those AEO engines, if you have that level of trust and credibility across the internet.
So the individuals concerned with that, part of the spectrum they play, again, we're teasing this a lot, help you contribute to that whole, and you're moving away from that kind of perhaps supposed linear demand journey, which we all knew never existed really in the first place. I interviewed John Watton. I interviewed John Miller recently, founder of Marketer. He was saying, it was always a construct. It was never ideal, and it's certainly got a long way further away from ideal right now. So that makes a lot of sense. One of the things we're going to talk about, Katy, in terms of the two different kind of ways you can analyze these personas that we're going to discuss in the Matrix is internal versus external. So your employees versus independent voices. Do you see there's some conflation or failure to understand the difference between these two types of people? Because there are groups even within there. And what kind of happens if you fail to understand the dynamics of the positivity or the different attributes that they bring to that conversation?
Yeah, I always see that, about 15 years ago, there was this thing where there were various tools that you could put a post up and all your employees would then post the same post out, kind of like a ripple effect. And for some brands, they have not moved away from that. They should have done, but they haven't. And I think one of the big challenges we have right now is this conflation of employees and independent voices. What happens is people treat employees like a broadcast channel, and they tend to look at independent voices like they're for hire. And both of those things kill trust. So what happens is employees end up going beige because they're frightened. They don't want to say something they can't say or feel that they can't say. And independents tend to walk up, the good ones, the ones we want to talk to, the people who have influence over our buyers, tend to walk away when they feel that they're being over-controlled. And in my opinion, internal voices are massively undervalued because they do feel messy. They are messy. People leave the company. You have to constantly be training them. You have to do a lot of cultural support in order to get people to say the right things, not force them to say the right things, but actually believe in what you believe, in what you believe. All of that takes time, but the scale of trust is immense.
And that's really, really brilliant way of putting it. And I did an episode with Stuart Maister over the summer where he talked about his metaphor was it's about the old method of brand management or brand control was kind of like a symphony. You'll kind of get all the different people to talk to play to a predefined part, and it's very closely controlled by conductor. Actually, it's more like jazz because you're trying to say to people that look, here's this framework which you can riff around. You can go and do your own thing, but you've got to come back to the central narrative. You can't deviate from it completely. You're giving people the freedom to do that rather than seeking to control them. I think I really like that as a metaphor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Worse suspect than not doing it allowed to do in the first place, or they'll just do it their own way. Before we kind of actually talk about the Matrix itself, one of the things I teased earlier on was I was suggesting that some of the kind of confusion around, what these different kind of thought leaders, influencers, advocates may be suggesting cynically it might be deliberate. And the one thing that occurs to me always in this is perhaps it's less cynical, more just it helps them. LinkedIn calling thought leader ads is kind of influencer ads, really. I mean, they're not, just because you're giving someone you're advertising someone's post, it doesn't necessarily mean they're a thought leader. It just means you're doing an advert, really. I mean, that's an example for me. Do you think there's any cynicism in this, or do you think it's just naivety?
I think it's a bit of both. A lot of what we see going on is actually quite innocent. I mean, let's face it, the industry as a whole, it's not just marketers, it tends to use these terms interchangeably. You see that when you read anything where they have to explain what the terms are. Do you know what I mean? And a thought leader can be just somebody who's got reach. That's, some of the platforms look at it like that. So, it's all very muddled, and who has time to work it out? It's that kind of feeling. So I do think a large amount of it is that some of it is on purpose jumping on the bandwagon of thought leadership, of influence, etc. in B2B. But I would say for me, one of the strongest underlying foundations of all of this is that as marketeers in B2B, we need to create more meaningful content. We need to move away from this. And this meaningful content, what are we really trying to influence? Really getting into the nugget of that and then using that to decide who we work with. That bit is the bit that's probably not so innocently missing. I think a lot of marketeers know that they're missing that bit. And I think we need to bring it back.
And I think just to that point, if you look at it less from an individual's perspective, look at the content output perspective, you talk to thought leadership agencies or experts from the kind of text-based, report-based content perspective, they would rally against a lot of stuff that's called thought leadership content is actually content marketing, because it's not really designed to shift anyone's perceptions. It's not really designed to change their opinions. It's really just a demand generation asset. And that's okay. I mean, Despite what we said about, potentially the limitations of a demand generation mindset, it's nothing wrong with that as long as you recognize that that is content marketing and it's not thought leadership. There are differences between the two things, and I
Yeah.
think this plays back then across the individuals that you're using in that context as well. So,
Yeah.
again, I'm just going to move on to one little point before we actually talk about the framework. I did some research into looking at the B2B marketing, was looking at how these terms are used and the percentage of campaigns where they applied. And what I found was that 28% of campaigns entered in the B2B Marketing Awards and the Elevation Awards in the US as well would use thought leaders in some capacity, right? So just under a third. 25% used external influencers like journalists or analysts. And that's very important. These are unpaid individuals, but then don't work for the organization. Only 11% used customer advocates, which is really surprising and very disappointing. And it's interesting. There's a lot of stuff going on around the area. 5% used employee advocates. So that's to your point earlier on about those individuals, you turning them into ventriloquists. Hopefully some of those weren't. Hopefully some of those are doing it right. And only 4% use influencers in the commercial sense, which is ironically is how many people still understand influencers in the world of B2B, because it reflects what we know of them in consumer. They are different. I haven't really got time to dig too much into that today, and actually they're used remarkably little, although they are used in some areas. So what's your reaction to that spread? Was that what you expect, Katy?
Well, yes and no, because this definition of thought leadership is I have a bit of a problem with it, because quite a lot, as you rightly said earlier on, of thought leadership is, not so much thinking. There isn't a point of view. Thought leadership has to change behaviors. It has to say something that makes people think. And so, yes, I'm not surprised. It's probably quite large because it's inflated. What I don't see is content, a vast amount of, that reflects those numbers of content out there that is actually thought leadership. There are a few brands doing it really well, but in the main, I wonder if it's being lumped in. So that does surprise me. The employee thing does not surprise me because of what we talked about. I think the effort involved for what are usually very small marketing teams to work with employees to get them to feel confident to be active on social and beyond is quite a challenge, and there's no real structure or expertise in that. So we kind of overinvest in talking and underinvest in the proof that sits behind the trust. That's the bit that we're underinvesting in.
Yeah, it feels like a lot of these things are, when the danger of actually applying it across the B2B marketing awards is some of these things are kind of should be structural and fundamental and kind of always on a layer of just business as usual that companies are doing. And it may not necessarily be the job of the task or applied task of the agency who's creating this particular campaign to recognize or integrate that. But I still think it's interesting because it talks about how much it's understood within as a communications channel, because they're all communications channels. Okay, so it's such a fascinating topic. I mean, I could talk about this all day, but I'm mindful that I keep saying I've done a framework. So let's just talk about the framework. So I'm going to just share that on my screen right now. So just bear with me 1 second. Okay, hopefully you can see that. So I want to thank you personally for helping me kind of give me some feedback on this as it's gone along the way. So created this there's actually a version of it within a longer report, which you can download via the link. Hopefully you'll be able to see that. I'll add it to your feed wherever you're watching this, if you haven't got it, or you can just email me. I'll send it to you. So what you can see here, first of all, I tried to talk about the internal versus external kind of dynamic here. So you can see that the internal, the two personas on the left-hand side are internal, or the ones on the right-hand side are external. And then you have and then drilling down one more layer here, we have thought leaders, and then we have influencers of different type who are all internal. Then on the far right-hand side, customer advocates. So I sought to try and describe the difference between these different personas within this kind of mix. And there's kind of a continuum, starting right at the top in terms of, because your thought leaders theoretically should be your most visible individuals who you're trying to actively promote and utilize most consistently. Then perhaps moving down to employee advocates, which despite Katy, I don't dispute what you said earlier on at all, but theoretically, and there are agencies, other people that specialize on this, where you can actually deploy that. If you get it right at scale, it can be very, very powerful. There are obviously employees, there are communication, there are individuals that you earn. And then you move externally to unpaid influencers. So these are people like journalists, analysts, consultants, authors, prominent figures who are interested in the area and who are willing to share your knowledge. And this is something which, terminology which applies to me retrospectively in my 30 years as a journalist. Did I say that? 30 years? Goodness me, has it been that long? It was only a couple of years back where we did some work on saying that actually what influencers are is it's more than just those paid people who understand from our consumer lives. It's actually all of these people who probably fit into the PR sphere, like journalists and analysts and myself. So it's that broader group of people who are very, very powerful. They don't require paying. They may require paying, but they don't require paying. It's more about their authenticity you're trying to tap into. And they've probably got a small field in terms of who they're connected, but they're very, very resonant within that field. Then moving to the right, we can see external influencers. We know what those people are. They're people who are paid to do what it is they do. And that's a place I've moved into, frankly, in a new persona. But you're seeing more of those, the people who built a social profile and are able and hire themselves out to promote messages on a collaborative basis. As you say, Katy, you want people to, they will, to get the best out of them, you need to work with them collaboratively. And the last area is customer advocates. And this is a fascinating area for me. A lot of work's happening in this area recently. You're seeing a lot of companies and individuals setting up to do this. And which we all know that the power of individual anecdotes and testimonies, whether it's sought, unsought, structured, unstructured, incredibly powerful to move people into that dark funnel, Katy, as you were describing earlier on, where they've made a lot of their decision already. And often the process that comes after is just about validating what they kind of already knew they were going to do. So it's really, really important in that. And then down the left-hand side, we've got a matrix to describe the roles that they play and how to understand the nuance between them. So you've got the level of trust and authenticity that they have, the audience type and reach that they use, the platforms of influence that they use, and the engagement style that they have. And the last of all, how you measure their impact. So again, to your point earlier on, it's not just around MQL flow or things like that. It's actually about something much more nuanced than that. So that's the matrix I put together. I'm very mindful that there may be other things, influencer style personas within here that I haven't recognized, because everyone's entitled to view, and I'm looking forward to developing this. But I welcome perspective and feedback on this if you'd like to kind of help me build this out in the future, because we're all every day's a school day and we can learn from it. So Katy, thinking about some of these areas, why we talked about why customer voices possibly aren't used so well. How do you think? Let's talk about. We talked about the external influences. Let's talk about the unpaid external influences. The ones. How these people have independence and integrity are paramount to them. How should brands approach these individuals? In a different ways, perhaps they might approach a paid influence.
I think I don't know if you've ever read the 6 thingies of influence, Robert Cialdini's book about influence. Can't think of the 20 influential. He has 6 influences, and one of them is reciprocity. A lot of what we do here is about social proof, is about influence, but actually when it comes to unpaid but meaningful influencers you want to work with, and it's about reciprocating. So now what you're really looking at doing is, I'm going to give you something that's going to either make you look good, so I'm going to give you that exclusive, the typical journalist style approach, or we're going to collaborate on this thing and I will help bring you bigger audiences or help you get on stage. Or the point being is, it's not just collaboration, it's a two-way street, much more with external influencers that are unpaid.
So it's a value exchange, right?
Yeah.
They get from you, you get something from them, and you each kind of trade off each other's value, and they can't be bought, so you shouldn't try and buy them. You just need to demonstrate, and you get reciprocal value back and reciprocal good vibe.
You do need to get to know them very well, and that's the other element of it. You need to get to know them really well, and this is where people get a little bit. It is just like it used to be in the very olden days of PR and journalists. It's you get to know them well enough that they'll take this story, or they'll be interested in this angle, or they'll want to come and see your manufacturing site, or they'll want to take their first ride in a driverless car, or they won't. You'll know them, but and volume is not what you're after. You're after those people that are going to be with you for a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, that are going to be part of your journey in marketing.
Yeah, and so it's not just a one-off moment. It's about a relationship. How does that apply then? What's the comparison then with paid influencers? Is it, if you can build a relationship with them, great, but presumably it's basically dependent on you've got the budget to work with them, right? So there's a different kind of dynamic at play. Is relationship still better? Do relationships matter? Or is it just you give them latitude to create the content in their own way and off they go?
I think a bit of both. The relationships, of course, they matter. The difference is the reciprocal bit nature of this is financial, it's commercial. So that you get that bit out the way. So it's less about a reciprocal relationship, but getting to know each other is really good. What do these people like? What do they not like? But I think that the joy of paid influencers is that you give them that autonomy, and it's amazing what ideas and the way other people will think how they can support you without you being very directional. You can give them all the briefing about what the brand, product, or whatever it is that you want to talk about is and what your key points are, but they then take that to the next level so that it becomes their own voice. And that, I think, is a better way of working with paid influencers, but you've got all the nasty business of what they get out of it and what you get out of it out the way because you've kind of put it into.
And because presumably, I guess to your point earlier on, you're probably best to pay them for the output rather than for the results, because then you're going to get they're less likely to be quibbling about things in that respect. Yeah. Okay.
Go buy media if that's what you want.
Because the irony about this is that who does buy these things, right? Because the PR team, and I speak from experience in this, right? The PR team aren't have the budget or the experience or the remit to do this, and the media team treat it as a different kind of a commodity. So I guess it's the content team, but they're so that's another conversation we can have another time. Let's just not get bogged down in that one. The fifth area is probably the most powerful, but the one we can see has probably the least amount of, or second least amount of interest or focus on, and that's customer advocates. People who've used your product or used your service and are willing to recommend it. Trust here is going to be extremely high. The data suggests we can see that we just historically haven't been leveraging it effectively, or perhaps at a more scaling it probably in its use. It's probably been used kind of anecdotally, haven't scaled it. So what's holding brands back?
Fear, I'd say, effort, internal politics, the gatekeeper, that this is my client. You can't talk to them. And because customer stories are often really messy and legal gets nervous that they might say something they shouldn't say, and teams are like, don't ask my client, and nobody really owns the program. And I think the challenge with customer advocacy is it's hard because you can't fake it. It's customer advocacy. So I think that the real thing is to have a program that helps you to devise an internal program to start with, that helps you to collate these stories that you want your customers so that you have this machine running and that you start to get them out. And what happens is it will snowball because other customers will see how it's like for the customers that are being more vocal, so on and so forth. And you can build it in. You can build it in really nicely. If somebody comes and asks for you for a 10% discount on the next sign up for whatever, you can go, yeah, but we want you to do this then, or whatever. I'm not suggesting that you always discount, but my point being is there's ways to negotiate your way through this.
Absolutely. I've seen a lot of stuff going on about this and some new kind of startups in the market. One platform I know in B2B that's probably quite well known, partner they're offering as a referral platform. And some people don't like that. Some people think it's great. Other company trusted are looking to kind of provide the industrialization of the means to be able to do that. One of the kind of criticisms for me was that you had often, to your point, if you've got a great referrer, or someone who's a great testimony, someone who will get on the phone and talk to a client. What happens is they get overused, and it actually almost burns through trust and through faith because they feel like they're being used and maybe even abused. So the danger is if you're doing it at that kind of ad hoc level, and the sales team are always pushing towards one person, it can ultimately backfire, I suppose. So just thinking about this, what I've tried to do, and you can this version you can see versus the Matrix you can see here is designed to be a snapshot version, right? In the report, if you have a look in your, however you're viewing this, you should be able to see a link to be able to download a 4-page version of it, which has many more rows and goes much more detail about this. And the idea is to give people understanding on a multifaceted level about what these different people are looking for and what it's like to work for them, what they need, et cetera, et cetera. Katy, how would you look at this matrix and decide to help work with these different personas to help build a plan?
So I think it starts with what you're trying to do, really, as always. So you start with your buyer. You start at the buyer end and you go, where are we getting the hiccups? What do we need to fix? Is it acceleration? For most of us, it's lead gen. So we need to convince people what's stalling that bit between, people seeing us and getting to the point where they will talk to our salespeople. What are the hiccups? Go do your research. Now, at that point, then you'll begin to be able to line up the kinds of activities that you need to take. Okay, I can see that one of the biggest challenges is that, they get confused about the benefits of some of the features we have because they don't really understand that. So we've got an educational piece to do, or they want more proof from other customers because we're new on the scene and they don't really know who we are. So we need more customer case studies. So my point being is that what you need to do is map it that way around. And once you have that map, you then can look at this matrix. Is brilliant because what you can do is it becomes your checklist. You can go, right, if we need more of this, let's put a bit more weight behind, say, thought leadership for educational purposes, and maybe a couple of influencers, paid or unpaid, who will help educate the market on, quantum computing or something like that, so that people understand. And then as we go through this process, let's bring in some nudging and nurturing with customer advocates. So now you've suddenly got your plan as to where you're going to weight it up and down. And you should always look at this matrix across the year, minimum of a year, because, I'd say longer, but let's, that allows you to weight things up and down depending on what you need, because each of them, as you say in the matrix, serves a slightly different purpose as to what value they're giving you as a brand and what value they're giving to your buyers. So you can weight things up and down depending on what you really need from this. So that's why I love it, because I love something that reminds me when, in the chaos that we live in, that when we've got our buyers changing their behaviors, we can just pick this piece up and go, right, we know where those behaviors are changing. We know what's needed to get more leads across the line. Where do we focus our attention in terms of credibility and trust?
That's fantastic. That's a great summary of action, because I really wanted to, I just found it confusing looking at this landscape. So I really wanted to try and provide something which people could use and understand and really break it down and see how these things work together, because they often just get forgotten because there's so much marketing that's going on that takes your attention, advertising and email campaigns and events and things like this. This is stuff which should figure into all of those things and should make all of those activities richer and more powerful and more impactful if they're done correctly. Providing this kind of clarity, is really something that as a kind of journalist turned podcaster influencer, I've always kind of tried to do as well, to almost myself. So really kind of interesting and really satisfying exercise in kind of structuring some thoughts and bringing it together. Katy, you've been really helpful, really been great to help talk through this introduction. Is there any other last thoughts you want to leave people with them thinking about when they're thinking about how to generate trust using the different personas?
Yeah, I'd say remember this is, I know there's a lot of operational fear around this because it does require a bit of attention, doesn't it? It's not something you can set and let run like a dashboard of paid marketing. But I would say this: influence in all this matrix is not a content tactic. It's a trust system, and you need to look at it like that, not like how many pieces of content am I going to create. Name the persona, respect how they earn credibility, and stop trying to control them, but actually surf that wave of their qualifications on credibility. So I think don't think of influence as content would be my soundbite.
Okay, I like that. It's a great way to leave it. And the kind of, I think we're moving into a world for me where these voices have become more and more powerful. We're being overwhelmed by content. AI is allowing people to churn out stuff of questionable quality. We're all overwhelmed. It's these individuals that will cut through for you. Whoever they are, if they're used correctly, they will resonate with your customers in ways that simple brand-based messaging just won't. And you can use them within those messages, but use these voices to kind of to turbocharge your marketing and to give it more resonance and impact. So thank you so much for listening to that. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you haven't already subscribed to Trust and Influence in B2B podcast, please do. There's loads of great content like this and wonderful people like Katy appearing on it very regularly. And please do download the full guide, which hopefully you can see in the notes. And I hope you enjoy that. But that's all for us today. Thanks for listening, and I hope to see you again very, very soon. Thank you.